The photographs were still pinned to the fridge when Sheriff Langley first entered the kitchen. A family of 4, smiling against the dull autumn fields of Marlow County. The father with his flannel rolled to the elbows, the mother holding a pie, 2 children squinting at the low sun. The pictures hadn't yellowed yet, though the air already smelled like old paper and rain. On the table, 4 plates, untouched since Sunday evening. The food had collapsed inward, congealed like the week itself had stopped moving. Neighbors said the lights stayed on through the night. Someone claimed to have seen shapes moving behind the curtains around midnight, tall, still silhouettes that didn't match the family's size. By morning, the house stood silent except for the refrigerator's endless hum, the sound of a machine that refused to notice absence. When Langley stepped inside, the smell hit him first. A blend of cooked meat, damp air, and something faintly metallic. The back door was open, the screen door tapping lightly in the wind, a rhythm without purpose. It was as if the whole house was breathing shallowly, waiting for something that never came. The sheriff called for backup, though he didn't know what he was backing up against. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the yard. Even the dust seemed untouched, like the air had chosen to preserve the moment. In the sink, 2 forks soaked in gray water. The clock on the wall blinked 7:03 p.m., the same time, according to the power logs, when the electricity had flickered across half the county that night. Langley stared at the frozen digits for a long moment, trying to feel the heartbeat of a house that no longer had one. He moved through the hallway, his boots whispering over the linoleum. The wallpaper peeled in long, quiet curls, like old skin. Every room he entered felt smaller than it should have been, as though the air itself had drawn inward. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was attention. Upstairs, the bedrooms were clean, beds made, toys in order, clothes folded. He noticed how still everything was. No breeze, no ticking clocks, not even the faint creak of wood settling. It was a silence that seemed to listen back. When he came back down, he stood at the kitchen doorway again, looking at the table. The food was still there, still holding its shape after days. The gravy had turned to a thin film. The peas were gray and dry, but nothing smelled rotten. It was as if decay had been denied permission to begin. He wrote in his report later that the house felt paused, not abandoned, as if the family had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. And if you drive past 42 Willow Creek Road today, you might still see the table through the window. 4 plates waiting, beneath a silence too heavy for an empty room. The first light of Monday morning stretched thin over Marlow County, tinting the wet fields in a pale amber. Sheriff Langley parked his cruiser beside the hollow white farmhouse and sat for a moment before stepping out. The engine ticked as it cooled, each pop echoing louder than it should have. Even the wind that moved through the cornstalks felt hesitant, as if the landscape itself didn't want to disturb whatever was left inside. The deputy, Carter Hill, arrived 10 minutes later. He was young, still believed that most things in life could be explained if you looked long enough. He'd been the one to answer the neighbor's call. Lights on all night, no answer at the door. Langley handed him a coffee from the thermos, both men standing in silence before the screen door that rocked back and forth with every faint gust. It sounded less like a door and more like someone sighing. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The thermostat read 53 degrees, but their breath fogged when they spoke. The smell of cooked meat and detergent lingered, like a dinner that had been over for hours, yet never truly ended. On the table, the plates had hardened into shapes of what once was food. 4 chairs, neatly pushed in. A single napkin unfolded on the floor, its edge stiff with something dark. Langley noticed the calendar first, October 1983, with every day neatly crossed out until Sunday the 9th. The pen used for those marks lay capped beside the phone, where the receiver hung halfway off the hook. He pressed it to his ear. No dial tone, just a low, humming note, like air moving through a throat that wasn't breathing. In the living room, family photos lined the mantel in perfect order. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, school portraits, no dust, no fingerprints. Only the faint reflection of two lawmen trying not to disturb a picture that still believed in laughter. Carter whispered that it felt like walking into a photograph, one taken just before something terrible happens. They found the father's wallet on the counter, keys beside it, the mother's purse under a chair. Upstairs, the beds were made, clothes folded, nothing ransacked, nothing taken. Yet the silence pressed harder with each step, a silence that wanted to be heard, that felt aware of its own weight. Langley muttered that he'd seen families run off before, but never like this. This wasn't panic. This was precision. Outside, two crows perched on the power line above the house, pecking at something invisible. When Carter walked out to check the yard, his boots left no sound on the wet soil. The ground felt soft, too soft, as if something below had recently shifted. He crouched and noticed faint impressions in the dirt. Not footprints exactly, but ovals, spaced evenly apart, leading toward the tree line behind the property. Whatever made them wasn't human, and it wasn't running. Langley radioed for a search team. The static response came back garbled, every third word lost in the hiss. When he looked up, he saw the kitchen light flicker. Once, twice, before steadying again. The clock on the wall still blinked 7:03 p.m. in digital red. Carter called from outside, his voice flat, uncertain. He'd found something near the edge of the cornfield, a child's shoe, the laces tied neatly, still dry despite the mud. Langley stepped onto the porch and saw his deputy standing motionless, the wind barely tugging at his jacket. Behind him, the corn swayed in waves, as though breathing slow and deep. For a second, Langley thought he heard something beneath that motion. Not the wind, not the birds, but a low rhythmic beat, like footsteps pacing inside the soil itself. Then it stopped, and in that quiet, both men realized the house wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. By noon, the property was crawling with people. Sheriff Langley had called in 3 deputies, 2 volunteers from the local firehouse, and a pair of county dogs that hadn't barked once since arriving. They fanned out across the open field behind the farmhouse, a flat golden stretch of corn and clay that seemed to absorb every sound they made. No echo, no crunch, no rustle. Just air, thick and static, as if the land itself was listening. Carter moved ahead with one of the volunteers, marking the perimeter with red flags. "Feels off," he muttered, his voice too loud in the silence. The volunteer didn't answer. He was staring down at something half buried in the soil. A plate, porcelain, its rim chipped, the same pattern as the ones on the kitchen table. Carter knelt, brushed it clean, and felt warmth radiating from it. Warmth in soil that was cold enough to frost over. Langley was near the tree line, taking notes in his weathered pad. Every few minutes he'd check his watch, not for time, but for rhythm. Something about the day felt uneven, like a heartbeat missing every third pulse. When he looked back toward the house, he noticed the curtains moving, though all the windows were closed. It wasn't the wind. The corn was still. The house, somehow, was breathing. At 1:17 p.m., one of the firehouse men called out. He'd found a patch of ground that looked disturbed, maybe dug up and flattened again. They began to dig with shovels, cautious, slow. 2 feet down, they struck something metallic. Langley crouched, wiped the dirt away. It was a watch, still ticking, the hands frozen at 7:03. When he lifted it, a faint electric hum passed through his fingertips and into the soil beneath. The deputy standing closest said he felt it too, like standing next to a power line that's humming under your skin. Langley didn't answer. He just stared at the watch, the way its frozen hands seemed to pulse faintly with each breath he took. The dogs started whining, not barking, whining, low and constant, their bodies trembling in sync with the hum. Then one of them sat, facing the house, head tilted. Langley followed its gaze. Upstairs, the curtains in the master bedroom pulled back just enough for a shadow to appear. Not a person, not movement, just a darker shape inside the dark. Carter swore and reached for his flashlight, though the midday sun was still high and harsh. They ran back to the porch. The front door, which had been locked when they left, now hung half open. The smell of ozone drifted through the air, like the aftertaste of lightning. Inside, the clock in the kitchen had changed. It no longer blinked 7:03. It was moving, slowly, backward, ticking in reverse. Langley turned the dial on his radio, calling dispatch. But the speaker only returned a whisper. "Leave it alone." 3 words, steady, metallic, and definitely not from dispatch. Carter stepped toward the hallway, calling out, his voice shaking more from disbelief than fear. "Sheriff, look at this." The walls, pale blue just hours before, were streaked with long brown stains, vertical, uneven, like something had melted through from the attic. He pressed his hand against the plaster. It was warm, faintly pulsing, as if something behind it was moving, slow and steady, just beneath the surface. Then came a knock, soft, deliberate, from inside the wall, once, twice, a pause, then nothing. Langley pulled Carter away. "Outside. Now." They stepped back onto the porch, both men breathing hard, both knowing that leaving didn't mean they were safe. The air around the property had changed again. Heavier, charged. The static was now a tone, deep and low, almost melodic, like the beginning of a song they couldn't quite hear. Langley looked at his watch, 1:47 p.m. The second hand twitched once, then stopped. Far beyond the cornfield, the sky over Marlow County darkened, not with clouds, but with something colorless, a dimming of daylight itself. And in that half-light, Carter thought he saw movement at the far edge of the field. 4 shapes, hand in hand, walking slowly toward the woods. They were small, child-sized, but there was something wrong with their motion. Too fluid, too even, like film running at the wrong speed. He blinked, and they were gone. Only the corn, still swaying to a wind that wasn't there. By dusk, the search team had gone home, leaving only Sheriff Langley and Carter behind to secure the scene. The local news truck had arrived, recorded a few minutes of missing family mystery, then left when the light fell. No one wanted to stay past dark. Langley didn't blame them. The air had weight now, the kind you could taste. It wasn't dust or smoke. It was something quieter, something that waited to be acknowledged. They set up a single floodlight near the porch and a portable generator that coughed every few seconds, like it didn't want to be there either. Langley stood at the edge of the field, staring toward the tree line where Carter swore he'd seen the figures earlier. The corn moved in long, slow waves, though there was no wind at all. "Sheriff?" Carter called from the doorway, holding up an old tape recorder he'd found in the living room. It still got batteries. "Want me to see what's on it?" Langley nodded, but when Carter pressed play, there was nothing. Not static, not hiss, just a blank, heavy silence. Then, faintly, a sound began to bleed through, rhythmic, mechanical. 3 seconds on, 1 second off. A pulse. Langley leaned closer. "That's power grid interference," he said at first, trying to convince himself. But then, beneath the hum, came a whisper. Soft, distant, a child's voice. "We're still at the table." Carter froze. He rewound, played it again. Same voice, same sentence. Langley switched the recorder off, his hands trembling just enough for the buttons to click twice. Could be a transmission, he said, but he didn't believe it. The generator behind them flickered. The bulb stuttered, caught itself, then flared bright enough to cast the field in harsh white light. For a moment it looked like the corn was made of glass, shining cold and still. Then the light died entirely. The darkness that followed wasn't total. It shimmered faintly, like the afterimage burned into the eye. Langley grabbed his flashlight. It didn't turn on, neither did the one Carter carried. But the clock in the kitchen window, still visible from the porch, had come alive again. 7:03 p.m., not blinking now, just holding steady, glowing red through the glass like a wound refusing to close. They went back inside. Langley checked his watch. 6:58 p.m., 5 minutes to whatever this was. He opened his notebook and started recording details out loud, his voice calm but his throat dry. Power fluctuation beginning again, air temperature dropping, smell of ozone present. As he spoke, the refrigerator in the corner clicked on. It shouldn't have. The power was out. Its motor hummed, steady and wrong, the sound deeper than a refrigerator should make. It matched the pulse from the tape. 3 seconds on, 1 off. At 7:03 exactly, the house exhaled. The sound came from every wall, a hollow, collective sigh that rattled the dishes in the sink. The radio on the counter flared to life, no station tuned, just a wash of voices bleeding into one another, all whispering the same 2 words. Still here, Carter stumbled back, knocking over a chair, while Langley turned toward the hallway. He saw shadows move across the wallpaper, long and human-shaped, but there was no source for them, no light, no bodies, just outlines, pacing the walls like memories burned into the paint. Then everything stopped. The lights returned. The house fell quiet again. 7:04. Langley steadied himself on the counter, looking down at his notes. Every line he'd written during the event was gone, erased clean, the paper smooth as glass. He looked up at Carter, whose face had gone white. "Sheriff," he whispered, "listen." From the tape recorder still lying on the floor came the sound of cutlery clinking on porcelain, and a voice, calm and domestic, like a mother scolding children. "Don't let your food get cold." Outside, the floodlight flickered back on. The field was still, the sky pale with the last of the day's dying blue. Langley stepped to the door and saw his own breath fogging again. He realized dimly that the night had fallen hours too early, and that the clock on the wall no longer showed 7:04. It was 7:03 again, and it had no intention of moving forward. Sheriff Langley drove back to the station with the tape recorder buckled into the passenger seat. The drive took 30 minutes, though the odometer insisted it had been only 9. He didn't turn on the radio. The silence felt safer than the idea of hearing anything familiar. The road shimmered under the high beams, blacktop glistening as if it had just rained. But there hadn't been rain in Marlow County for weeks. At the office, the night clerk raised an eyebrow when Langley walked in carrying the recorder like a newborn. He muttered something about late paperwork and waved her off, retreating to the evidence room. He placed the device on the metal table, pressed play. Nothing. Not even the hum. Just the click of the reel and the faint sound of his own pulse in his ears. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Maybe it was over. Maybe the house had been the problem. Then, from somewhere deep inside the speaker, came a scrape. A dragging sound, faint, like a chair leg moving across the floor. Then another. Langley leaned closer, the smell of dust and oxidized metal filling his nose. "Carter," he whispered out of habit, though the deputy was still back at the farmhouse. On the tape, a voice emerged, faint, breathy. "Sheriff, can you hear me?" Langley froze. It wasn't a recording of him. It was responding to him. He hit stop. The voice cut off instantly. He waited, then pressed play again. "Please don't rewind," it said, more clearly this time. The accent was local, the tone calm. But beneath it, something else began to grow. A low vibration, like the subsonic hum of a refrigerator coil, slowly bending upward in pitch until it formed words. Not words exactly, but syllables trying to find shape. Still, here. He turned the volume down, but the sound didn't fade. It was in the room now. A soft resonance in the air vents, in the floor, even in his teeth. The fluorescent light above him flickered, dimmed, and then steadied into a sickly yellow. Langley took a step back. The tape kept spinning, even though he hadn't pressed anything. It spun faster and faster until the reels blurred, and then it stopped on its own. A new voice spoke, lower, slower. It was his own. "They never left, Sheriff." "You did." He stumbled back, knocking over a chair. When he looked again, the recorder was silent, the reels still. He replayed the last few seconds, but now it was blank, as if the sound had never existed. He reached for his notes to mark the time, but the clock on the wall wasn't moving. The second hand twitched every few seconds, but refused to advance. 7:03 p.m., the same time. Miles away from the farmhouse, the same hour was replaying itself. Langley grabbed his keys, ran outside, and started the car. He didn't know where he was driving, only that he couldn't stay. The tape was still in his pocket, its plastic casing warm, almost pulsing. As he turned onto the main road, the radio flared to life on its own. Through the static came a whispering chorus, layered and out of sync, like children trying to imitate adults. "We finished dinner, Sheriff. You should come back." Then silence. The headlights dimmed. The car stalled. When he opened his eyes again, he was parked outside the farmhouse. He didn't remember turning around. The porch light was on, flickering gently, like someone inside had just walked past. He stepped out, clutching the tape, heart hammering, breath freezing in the air. The front door was open now, not broken, just waiting. Inside, faint light spilled from the kitchen window, and the smell of cooked meat drifted out once more. Warm, recent. On the table were 4 plates, and one more, newly set, with a folded napkin and silverware still gleaming. The front door whispered open as if it had been waiting for him. Langley stepped inside, boots heavy against the wooden floor, the smell of dinner thick and wrong. Too warm for a house without power, too human for a place that should have been empty. The lights glowed faintly amber, like the memory of light rather than light itself. He could hear something in the walls again, a faint rhythm. The creak of chairs, the scrape of cutlery, the breath of people long gone. He spoke softly. "This is Sheriff Langley, if anyone's here." But his voice didn't echo. It blended into the air like it belonged there. The table was set for 5 now. 4 plates in their original places, and a 5th, pristine silverware untouched, a napkin folded tight, a chair waiting. The clock on the wall ticked to 7:03, even though the second hand didn't move. Langley felt his pulse sinking to it, steady, mechanical, inevitable. He reached out and touched the new plate. It was warm. Steam still curled from the food, roast beef, potatoes, gravy, just like the meal he'd smelled that morning. It looked fresh, but the color was wrong. Too gray, too perfect. It looked preserved. A faint voice came from behind him, soft as air moving through curtains. "Sit down, Sheriff." He turned, but no one was there. The hallway yawned into darkness. The wallpaper shimmered slightly, its pattern moving like skin shifting under breath. The sound of silverware clinking resumed, slow and deliberate, coming from everywhere at once. Langley backed away, but the chair behind him scraped against the floor on its own, pulling out, inviting him. The house wanted him at the table. He whispered to himself, "This isn't real." The tape recorder in his coat pocket clicked. Then his own voice echoed from it, recorded just minutes before, though he hadn't pressed anything. "You came back. You always do." He froze. The recorder clicked again. "You should sit, Sheriff. They can't start without you." Langley's throat tightened. He remembered the plate, the fifth setting, the warm food. He remembered his own badge number etched faintly into the handle of the knife. The kitchen light dimmed, replaced by the cold glow of the refrigerator door, which had swung open by itself. Inside were 4 glasses of milk, untouched, sweating with condensation. On the inner shelf sat a single photograph, taped against the back wall. The Marlow family, smiling at the same dinner table, same plates, same food. Only now, a 5th figure sat among them, blurred, head bowed, a shape that could have been anyone. Langley felt the room tilt, as if the world had leaned in to watch him understand. He dropped the tape. It kept playing. "You were late again," said the father's voice, "but we saved you a seat." The walls pulsed once. Every window darkened at once, reflecting the table, but not the room. In the reflection, the 5 chairs were filled. All of them, each face pale, eyes wide and motionless. The smallest one, a boy, turned his head in the glass, just enough for Langley to see his own badge pinned to the child's shirt. Then the reflection smiled. The chair behind him moved again. Langley sat without meaning to. The silverware lifted itself, the meal steaming under ghost light. He tried to move, but his arms felt heavy, his body distant, his heartbeat no longer his own. He looked at the plate before him. The food had gone cold in seconds. Across the table, the family stared, not angry, not sad, just waiting. The clock clicked. 7:03. It would always be 7:03. Outside, the searchlights flickered one last time and died. Carter returned hours later to find the farmhouse quiet. The table was still set for 5. The food was untouched, perfectly preserved. Sheriff Langley's car sat in the driveway, door open, headlights dim. Inside, his notebook lay beside a tape recorder. The reel spun endlessly, never reaching its end. Through the faint hum came a woman's voice, calm and clear. "Dinner's ready, Sheriff. Come eat before it gets cold." They say the Marlow County case was never closed. Officially, it was filed under unresolved domestic disappearance, but the file itself vanished from the archives sometime in 1987. What's left are fragments, police notes without handwriting, tapes that hum without sound, and a single photograph found in the sheriff's locker, a dinner table with 5 chairs. No faces, just shadows. The farmhouse still stands at 42 Willow Creek Road, though the county records list it as condemned. Windows broken, roof sagging, paint peeled to gray bone. But those who drive past at night say they sometimes see a dim light in the kitchen, like a candle, or the glow of a refrigerator that never stopped running. Locals tell each other stories. They say the Marlow family had been seen walking the road years after, silent and hand in hand, eyes dark as mirrors. Some claim to have followed them to the porch only to find nothing there but the hum of power lines and the smell of rain. Others say that sometimes when the wind dies completely, the whole field around the farmhouse goes still. No crickets, no birds, no sound at all. Just a hush that feels expectant, like someone holding their breath. Power company logs show a spike in consumption at that same farmhouse every Sunday, exactly at 7:03 p.m. No one lives there. The grid registers a surge, holds it for a minute, then drops to 0. They've replaced the lines twice. It doesn't change. People avoid driving that stretch of road after dark. The trees seem closer there, the air thicker. You can feel something watching from the cornfields, not malicious, just aware, patient, the kind of silence that remembers names. A few investigators came back in the late 80s, chasing rumors, testing soil samples, recording audio. Most of them left before nightfall. The ones who stayed never filed reports. There's a rumor that one of them, years later, was found living 3 towns over. He refused to speak, but his walls were covered with newspaper clippings and a single phrase written again and again in red ink. It's still 7:03. Sometimes truckers passing through Marlow County report hearing a faint radio transmission, not music, not static, but the sound of utensils and a voice saying grace. It fades as they drive north, lost to the fields. Next, we'll move farther north, another place, another silence. But if you listen closely, you might recognize the sound. It's the same quiet that began here in Marlow County, because when the wind stops, it never really stops. It just listens. Subscribe for the next story, and tell us what you think happened to them. We're still listening.